So, since we at the university, I suppose first thing I should start off is like a presence check, attendance sheet. If I'm a first speaker today to make that joke, I'm incredibly proud of myself. If I'm not the first one, that's even better. That means my ambition of becoming like a fully generic speaker is on a very good track. But when I submitted this talk, organizers asked me to rate its level of advancement. Cool. But it's kind of hard to tell when you don't really know who are you going to talk to. So if we could start off like a very basic interactive segment, if you could raise your hand if you are a working professional, if you have IT-related job nowadays. Good. Now, if that job involves managing people or projects. Again, lovely. And if you've managed those people and projects for more than 3 years, let's say, how it looks. Perfect. My speaker barometer is now well calibrated, so we can move on. Let's roll. So let me start with my own story and kind of answers to those questions. Ever since I began my professional journey, I always had this urge to like build things. That's kind of why I got into like a digital domain eventually, because I entered the market at the time where if you could click the right buttons to some degree, you could make something out of nothing. And for me, it was just incredible. But once I joined like actual project teams as a junior developer then, I kept running into this recurring frustration. After weeks, months, maybe not years, let's stop at months of work on given project, we deliver eventually, we do a big rollout, new features and such, and boom. Almost immediately, we start getting change request bugs, next revisions and iterations on a thing that we delivered. And not because that something was broken or we did a particularly bad job at it, but rather it seemed like user or product owner, whatever the setup is, like changed their mind. Like, duh, why? And a few years down into my career, I crossed over, how I like to say, to another side of a deadline. I started to work more closely with like business stakeholders, user groups, market itself, like launching my own products and stuff. But the pattern actually stayed the same. We deliver something really cool, we launch, but the market response, user response is, yeah, that's great, but actually, I want something else nowadays. It was as if hitting on a first mark wasn't the thing. No one either cared or knew how to do it. So I started to wonder, now being on the more business-related side, have I become a part of a problem? Am I now this product owner guy who is changing the mind? Am I the hero who became a villain but does not really understand its own evil kind of a situation? Then, to some degree, maybe. Along the way, I received like a full spec starter pack for an early manager involving a lot of agile-related indoctrination about managing the change, uncertainties and stuff. So I was well equipped with those. But it kept nagging me that even at the really small scale, when we cannot apply VUCA principles, it's not like Trump has involvement in anything in my backlog, so it's not justification for any change coming up. The best we can offer is compromise nowadays. So much use of experience in our hands, and we still have to keep on trying. So where does this all come from? My name is Krzysztof Przekwas. I go also by Krzysztof Pro in some corners of internet. And for many years, I worked alongside multiple startups, as well as a kind of bigger corporations, launched a few products of my own, helped them get into the market. Some I had to talk down from the market, happens. And in my view, this phenomenon we're just trying to outline is just happening everywhere, from a billion-dollar corporation to this garage-made market disruptor kind of idea. And that's exactly what I wanted to share today, my personal take, how I see it, how I view it, and how I react to it nowadays. So the interpretation I have for you is grounded in mid-80s, I would say. Days of beginning of a computerization of a digital world, how it was created. So that was many called that era, the birth of the internet and such. So yeah, TCP/IP was introduced at the time, paving the way for World Wide Web. hard drives, CD drives started accumulating our digital creations, and many core memories have been done on Atari console, chasing or outrunning the ghost in Pac-Man. So at the time, one of most innovative places on the planet, there have been quite a few of them to be fair, but was also Xerox Research and Development Center. And that's where the guy named Larry Tesler was working at the time. I would personally call the guy co-author of almost anything that was ever created on a computer, because he's the guy who invented copy-paste mechanism. So that's kind of a contribution, to be fair. So as a computer scientist, he worked on all kinds of projects exploring possibilities of emerging technologies in there. One of them was Xerox Ultra. Later on, after he moved to Apple, it was Apple Lisa, paving the way also for personal computing at the time. So he had this incredible thing in his hands, something that no one's seen before to some degree. But that also means no one was really waiting for it. No one knew about it or knew how to use it and demanded it, per se. So being unsure what to do with it, he just started applying it to various aspects of life and use cases that he could think of. And during the procedures, somewhere along the way, he arrived at the conclusion that we call nowadays a Tesler's law. So let's break it down with a rather simple example just to show off what the idea is about. Let's imagine that someone needs to calculate area of a given plot of land. Just big as he wants to sell it or something. Assume they only have access to moderately functional calculator. So now if the task is difficult or not, I leave it up to you. Probably depends on the math skills. But if we think about where the difficulty may show up in this task itself, our user has to measure the plot of land themselves, understand the shape the plot does have, came up with mathematical formula to describe it, and then actually can hand it off to the tool itself. And when it comes to difficulty on the tool side, it's kind of calculators, respecting arithmetics, probably is expected. So to be honest, nowadays, surveyors do not really run around the fields with skill calculators in a pocket. So having that as a start, let's just move on to like more realistic example. Probably, I'm not a surveyor myself, but probably the user accesses some tool in the form of a website or an app. That's why they click through the boundaries on a nicely provided map or choose the plot from the list. Through various visual cues, the system suggests what to do, how to do, what we are interested in, and presents it in a visually appealing format. So the tricky parts, defining the edges, shape, calculating the area, are now handled kind of instantly by the program, by the system, or a tool. That's it, right? Nothing extra to it. So now when we think about it, the tasks themselves, same, haven't really changed, but they just appear in the different places, on the different sides of the spectrum. So this is exactly the core of a Tesler's law. In both cases, the overall complexity remains the same. What changes are the proportions where that complexity actually lives. So 3-act play. Complexity stays constant within a scope of the user need. However, functionalities that we invent into tools are meant to shift that complexity away from a user into the tool or system. And in that fashion, user experience is essentially a measurement of how much complexity we have moved and how good or conveniently we have done that. So let's cut the Tesler law at this definition. Because Larry didn't work in a vacuum, though. He had, of course, colleagues he started sharing his thoughts with. And one of them was Bruce Tognazzi, better known in the industry as Tog. They met after Larry joined Apple in the late 90s, I think it was, where they worked on a successor. It was Macintosh at the time. And to give you a sense of how brilliant Bruce himself was, he's a co-founder of Nielsen Norman Group. So if you are into like UX stuff, that's a name to be known there. If not, I would gladly suggest a quick Google search. As personal computers became more widespread and their capabilities grew exponentially, Bruce couldn't shake off a feeling that the previous guy, Larry, was kind of missing something in his interpretation. He was onto something, but also missing. And that feeling eventually grew into the topic of this presentation, which is Togg's paradox. So Bruce observed that the tasks users were doing on early Macintoshes did not really fit the pattern that he imagined. So initial feature set of a Macintosh was great at the time, not mind-blowing by today's standards, but shortly after the Macintosh gained popularity, the Bruce's team that managed functionalities or like a user satisfaction of Macintosh user was just flooded with requests of new stuff, new features, new use cases for Macintosh. And Bruce was on one side happy about it, but on the other, like they spent so much cash on testing, so much time doing interviews, comparing different market products, competitors, other PCs at the time. They were certain on the launch that Macintosh shouldn't really miss a thing. So what's going on? Have really been that blinded by so many of the feedback coming just after the launch? So according to Bruce, this phenomena was just the paradox, one that contradicted his colleagues' belief. And remember, Larry assumed that the complexity of a task remains constant. The only possible math in it is shoving complexity to the different side. But Bruce's experience clearly disagreed, because after the system was implemented, it shifted the complexity, but user didn't seem less burdened. It was still kind of hyperactive guy and rather busy. So you might be even tempted that the user was more busy or more occupied due to the system taking that responsibility onto himself, dragged by the issues that system implemented itself, like its own existence. And in this paradox, Bruce emphasizes that it's not the task complexity that it's constant. It's users' innate capacity for complexity. The actor or persona will always strive to use their capacity for complexity. Often we also call this as a cognitive load, but usually in a bit of a different situation, so I will use capacity here. But put simply, when we feel we still have energy left, we will try to use it, and we will expect from the surrounding and from the tools that we use to pick up the pace and adjust to us, not the other way around. So just because things were harder or slower beforehand does not really erase the potential that we have today in front of us. So as a result, the relief the user feels after this complexity is taken away is rather short-lived and soon replaced by higher expectations, demands, or volume of actions conducted. So you could sum it up sharply with a line from Dune, where the only human science seems to be science of discontent, dissatisfaction maybe. But does that really mean the paradox itself is strictly negative? Sure, you can paint it that way, why not? So if we put both into like extreme interpretations, the extreme Tesla guy will tell you that all complexity can be eliminated by a good enough system, that the system can fully replace the human because the human is actually the source of a trouble in all of it. The extreme Tog, the other hand, would warn you that no matter what you do, no matter what you deploy, new problems will always arise and you will never fix it completely. And the world itself generally is heading into more complexity internally. At the same time, you can kind of post really extreme positive interpretations where Tesla will emphasize that we as people, yeah, maybe we will be replaced by machines, but we are also extremely agile in our complexity changes. We can easily adapt, we can easily give out some complexity that we manage. While Talk will emphasize how irreplaceable that ability is in case the new problems arise. The system will never keep up with those new bits that it self-invents. Both will agree that the good innovation is always useful. So which is better, who is more right? That's kind of this psychological interpretation, quantum physics here. So I will just shove it with it depends and move on for now. When I read about this theory initially, and those two guys, it really resonated strongly with the beliefs and the mindset I shared at the beginning. In fact, in kind of terrifying way, because if such brilliant guys have been thinking about it, talking about it, inventing 40 years ago, and I do struggle with this nowadays, how bad I am. and then reading talk that you will actually never fix it. New problems will always keep on coming when you deliver. Then why I am at all? There's no chance for me there. But eventually, I embraced the fact that those two still struggled with it, but eventually delivered stuff that changed the world in multiple dimensions. So there is hope in it. It's more about how to manage that, and that's what I want to move now with impact of those paradoxes and law on our IT world today. So I will spend more time generally talking about challenges and those uncomfortable bits, but when we think about it, there's always very positive side in here. The fact that we invent means the new problems come up, means there are new problems to be solved and invented about, so it's an ongoing cycle. As a human, we do have infinite capacity to generate needs and then to respond to those consumption progress in a similar fashion. So that's kind of what many industries, and I would vote for the fact that IT industry also relies on. That, yeah, we do invent a lot, but those inventions can create a couple of problems along the way that we can gladly invent again to fix them again, and move on and move on and move on for a time. A cool examples of it from recent years, it's hard to not notice those AI-based wave products nowadays. And yeah, they are great. And right behind them, we do have another wave of ethical AI use cases, anti-AI movements, and all the products that try to fix the problems that AI adoption actually invents. So it's an ongoing cycle, I would say. However, as said, coin has two sides. So lack of work is bad. Too much of the work is not great either. Lack of requirements is uncomfortable, but avalanche of them does not really move you forward anyway. So agility in that regard is about managing a bit of a spectrum, not finding a particular balance, but managing those two extremes, moving further and closer depending on a time frame. So keeping that mindset based on Torg's and Larry's principles, let's go through a few symptoms, how we can see that in a modern IT development. Some more common, some more specific, but at each point I will try to stop for a second, discuss how more or less popular practices we can adopt. And I will be changing hats kind of in the middle, going from like a more leader guys, from more product management guys, more developer-centered suggestions. So it will be a bit of a ride. So starting with obvious one, when we think about requirements, that always binds rather closely to stuff called scope creep. The scope product slowly but steadily grows further. So it's hard to ride a race where the finish line is also running away. It's not really the most comfortable one, although there are stuff like the one Red Bull is doing stuff like it. We don't know when it ends, how many resources we need, what pace to keep to not burn ourselves or burn too many resources and arrive in a good fashion at the finish line. So first response in such situation is always keyword of prioritization, although barometer stuff, I saw most of you are working, so I will be not talking about that too deeply. You can use any framework you can think of. There's so many of them that it's not worth delving into too much, so I will just show it with Moscow, one of most heavily used ones. Prioritization itself is great, but answers the question what to do. It does not answer where the finish line is. It will just tell you in which order to conduct the task. So then what you need actually is deployment manager, firm deadlines, version of a system, phasing in development, anything that will actually cut the scope into pieces that we can sign off and deliver and move on. And then in between those moments of shipping and moving on, there's a decision point that lets you decide if should we move on to like next phase or maybe the other thing around because we are at the good enough spot. And lastly, in that space, less popular but kind of useful, and it highlights the mindset I will try to promote, is an evolution of Moscow called Kano model. And I personally really like it because it bounds the impact of prioritization on user satisfaction. Often when we start a project, we prioritize a lot of must-be's, and that kind of makes sense, not going to argue about it. When I buy my car, I prefer it to ride, to drive, before I check how responsive the entertainment system is. But if we think about it in Kano mindset, when we deliver anything that's a must-be, at best I will deliver the product that is okay, bearable, tolerable, something at that level. In many cases, we can improve that reception on the customer side, even compromising some of the must-be's by including something called in that model delight test, where we do have much higher satisfaction for the end user, for the recipient, versus the effort needed, time needed, or any other metric that we currently will try to evaluate on the task itself. And what that gives you is a user satisfaction. And what I will try to show in a few other places, this satisfaction is the currency to be used when we try to negotiate the end scope. Currency and trust are the two main currencies to be used in a product management when we try to counter anything like scope creep. So having that satisfaction, we can cut the project into smaller bits, into smaller releases, and then have bigger chances and bigger opportunities to actually sign a project as delivered, even if some of the bits are still hanging on, but that's a business decision where we want to move on further. So when the project team is constantly bombarded with requests, after some time they will also try to prepare technologically for anything coming up. What if gonna do mobile at some stage? What if the next month there will be 10 times more integrations that we hit this one? This kind of a discussion. So it's generally a good thing, not gonna argue over it, but if that mindset is steady for a bit too long, then domain accumulates additional layers of abstractions. And what this could backfire you is the cost for the development rise, and somehow at some level, the quality and resilience of a system will drop. And if you cross a certain critical mass, it will drop rather harshly. And that's when we go into these systems with legacy hashtag that are on the market for just a year or two. So a useful approach to it is, of course, can be building products in in modules. It's okay, we can focus at a specific element for a sec and then move to another, so we have better chance to actually design it well. But what I will try to encourage is to leave space for the actual development teams, to encourage conversations about architecture of a general system, of a whole bit at once. If we are happy with how this system as a total is shaped, and if we could, how we could change it. You don't have to really contribute superbly if you are not too technical kind of a guy. It would be beneficial if you did, but you don't have to do it. But leave that capacity in the team, facilitate that for them, so they can self-rely and self-notice which bits that they did is over-engineered, which is correct, which is under-engineered. In a constant stream of changes, it's easy to also use user. Continuously changing the tool interrupts user learning and optimization procedures. You know, it's hard to figure out the tool if it changes daily, the button shifts to another spot every week. So a good starting point is having any kind of a product roadmap that we can deliver to end user or business stakeholders, just so they trust us that we do have a goal in all of this madness, that there is a reason for it. Of course, when we talk about roadmaps, as being also ex-product guy, it's a bit of uncomfortable for us, because suddenly we have to make some commitments and, God forbid, be accountable for them at some level, which is not greatest feeling, and it always feels super heavy to do that roadmap, a lot of thinking and such, but this is the trust builder. Once again, this currency you may need to let users know that there's a plan, and you can trust, and we will get there. We may have a bit of a wobbles along the way, but it's gonna be cool. And make it public, if you can. In most of the cases, you actually can. How public you can go depends on the type of a product and where it's gonna be used and which fashion and such. You can try stuff like feature-based, frill, acute, I think. Those where users can actually vote on the features they would like. This you can keep as a product hands off for the prioritization. See, this is what the crowd is wanting. So you can prioritize intelligently and remind users and kind of yourselves that you are not building in a vacuum, that there is another end to the product. Semantic versioning is cool, but I will not be talking about technological aspect of it and like a package management thing, but this gives also suggestion to the users which changes are interesting to focus on at which, using the currency of trust, they can just let go and assume this is what was needed and what was required along the way. So just when it comes to product management, semantic versioning does also have a significant use case itself. The same information overload doesn't really do any good for the decision makers in a project. We are caught then in this difficult decision to deliver quickly but are-centeredly, or just wait a bit for like a sure bet. Unfortunately, the latter option is kind of fugazi. There's no such thing. If the only certain thing is change, then if we wait, then we're going to deliver late, but still uncertain. So you lose on both fronts at the time. So the decision there is the time boxing. Decisions need to come quick, and that's how we should be evaluated as a leaders and how we should evaluate our leaders, that there is a decision time and there is a doing time. And we have to make a decision in a given time frame to proceed. Additional element here may be already a bit overused slogan here and there of data-driven decision making. But in this case, however, I prepared like a super small example for myself last year, just to show you how simple decision making can be in that fashion. I do software that provides IT infrastructure in a hybrid cloud. So while visiting our offices and seeing our technicians work, our system looked absolutely terrible on widescreen monitors. In my heart kind of broke a bit. We discussed the topic with the business guys, and I received like a rather classic, there's resolutions, you know, they change on the time. No way about it. They look bad, but it's still functional, right? No problem. But I had one additional ace up my sleeve, I would say, which is just absolutely basic telemetry we had in the product. And with a simple email, I was able to tell that quarter of our users are widescreen guys. I was actually surprised myself about it. And this is way more popular resolution than these mobile and tablet improvements that business was so interested in. So a week later, I basically had the equipment outside to improve that fashion. So in that sense, I do have important point, kind of maybe rather harsh. In 2025, if you have a product of any kind and you have no telemetrics or no user-centered analytics, I think this is a bit of a shame nowadays. There's so many options on the market that you can implement to any kind of a product, and have none, it means that we are shooting in the dark, basically. That we trial and error on the product management level, one of the most costly ways to manage the product. So for almost any type of a product, you can choose free, open source, paid one, robust or simple telemetry or analytics tools within like a 15 minutes, really. Without it, you're just in the dark. So talking about complexity in the system itself, starting from a user perspective, growing system complexity means we risk turning it into this kind of black box pattern. So it becomes a container where stuff comes in, stuff happens, stuff comes out, and we see input, output, but what happens in the middle, no idea. This is how many, many people felt about AI for quite a long time. So if we don't know what happens in the middle, we kind of lose trust intuitively because we kind of have no idea how should I trust it. So how to rebuild that trust, again, the currency, through transparency and do it as much as you can. Of course, not always you can describe exactly and show off what's happening underneath and why and such, but you can do that by the product management, advanced status messages into the product, some more understandable logs or commit messages there, feedback, anything that will help the user understand what system did to achieve given outcome. Accumulating complexity can also have alternate phase when viewed from like a more business-centered side. Assuming we have done a good job on doing a product and accumulated a lot of complexity from a business process side, we may build this unintentionally, kind of unrealistic expectations. Those are the kind of discussions that, how come adding a new button for a form can take 3 weeks, guys? It's a simple system, right? Yeah, it's simple for you because it's complex on the inside. And then here I really did not find any silver bullet, kind of golden nugget suggestion how to fix it, besides just, once again, maybe transparency through some sort of diagramming. We can talk BPML and stuff, but also just common discussions and system being descriptive, what's happening underneath. So the user does have understanding of underlying complexity, but also from the business side. and this topic close to very my heart. When we set simplicity and automation as a top priorities, when we want to improve on efficiency, we do expose our environment to significant risks, particularly for the users, who in addition to simplicity need flexibility. So we talk basically about power users, super admins, all kind of domain ninja. Their skills and needs are usually rather unique or used in a lot of places, so we don't automate them because this is not the greatest use case for an automation involvement. But we also must not deprive them of actual ability to conduct those super actions along the way. And a bit of my own story here. In a system I was working at, this IT infrastructure delivery, my users are highly technical. We're talking like network engineers, SOAPs, first line support, DBAs and stuff. So the type of users that kind of prefers keyboard shortcut over fancy shading and UI improvements instead of animation support for more exotic browsers or hardened systems would be highly preferred. So beyond the form, it's good also to think about the medium itself. So after, no, actually it was before the story about the widescreen monitors, I was approached for the team of DBAs from northern Sweden. I saw this cost them a lot, so I appreciated it really, really deeply. And they reached out to me that, yeah, the ITSM system we have, it's great, we love it, superb. But we were just thinking if that's anyhow possible, that maybe we could report the time on a ticket through CLI anyhow. And I would have never guessed that, thinking about like ecosystem itself of ITSM. We had no CLI support, it was the standard ticketing system there. And I would never, even if I would propose the best ever design for the ticketed system possible, I would never cover the need for the command line support. So having that feedback, yeah, sure, we implemented that. The Autorest just packed it up as a CLI tool and moved on. So thinking about the medium, when working with a lot of business guys do a lot of emails. Maybe emails are not that bad how it's often described. Send emails, receive emails, such the system. A while ago, we could also talk about SMS, but it's not so heavily used nowadays. But WhatsApp, maybe, or stuff like Slack or Teams or anything that exists in a more corporate environment. It's also a great thing to plug in. So we talked about how rapidly growing software is a challenge, and taking the responsibility of complexity of a business side also brings this complexity into the product. And if it is into the product, it's also in the product team. And it transfers to the developers in there, actually. So developers need to understand more and more of a business part of the product. So unfortunately, there are two hurdles there. One is that they won't always want to do it. That depends on the organization if that's really needed or not. I will leave it up today. But the second one, which we kind of cannot jump over, is they will not always be able to do so, even if they want to. Because we hired them for being great software guys and creating amazing systems, not for being a great business analytics kind of a guy. So there's just clash of competences at some level. So this creates a huge risk of creating like a headless rider situation. Creating a system where user does not know what it does, black box. The business does not understand it due to false simplicity. And when the actual developer does not really understand the shape and the use case of a system itself. So it's extremely important to provide developers with access to direct domain knowledge. And again, I do have here a rather firm opinion that it should be a person. Yeah, wikis are cool, some chatbots are great, but it should be a persona. It should be flesh and bone kind of a interface. The reason for that is we have to befriend the business from the development or the product mindset. It has to be kind of our friend. It has to be a person that we do enjoy, because when we do befriend them, we want to help a friend. And from the product or the development point of view, it's kind of the role for the product to help the business matters, to keep the users happy, to have a cash flow going and such. And that was the last of the endpoints I wanted to discuss with you today. Conclusions, I would say, think about the complexity that the system handles. It's a thing. It does not disappear, though. It moves, it shifts. The product development drives the growth requirements. So if you control the product development, if you control the outcome part, you will actually control the input of the requirements into the product area. So discussion can branch off into several interesting directions, but I'm close on time. So for the fans of classic sources of information, I would highly recommend Talk's book, Talk on Software Design. Some parts of it have already aged a bit, not gonna lie. But for me, it also remains a great example of why saying that in IT world we have two things that are absolutely certain. One is that everything absolutely changes all the time. And the second one is nothing actually truly changes. It's all the same bit for now, 40 years and over. So with that, thank you so much for being with me today. And we do have a few minutes left. We don't have? Too bad. So I'm available for your questions.